This is a bird. This is a distant, extinct relative of it. Another, even older relative. And if we keep going back in time, past the raptors, past the giant cousins of Tyrannosaurus, we arrive among the last dinosaurs on Earth at this monster. Around 70 million years ago, on the flooded plains of what is now Mongolia, lived an animal with the largest claws any creature has ever had in the history of the planet. Each claw could pass 20 inches of bone alone, and with its keratin sheath, reach nearly 3 feet, 3 on each hand. Curved blades the size of swords at the end of arms more than 8 feet long.
But its appearance, it looked like the most terrifying predator that ever existed.
Neck, a huge belly, a body covered in feathers, and a tiny head ending in a beak.
But here's the detail that breaks everything. This monster didn't hunt anything, it ate plants.
So, no predator of its time seemed willing to attack it. It was less a hunting weapon and more a walking 5-ton fortress. When you realize that this giant with enormous claws was, deep down, a peaceful herbivore that scared even the biggest predator in the region, it becomes clear we're looking at one of the strangest animals that ever existed. So why did evolution hand the largest claws in history to a plant eater? Why did it grow to this size? And why did not even the greatest predator of that land dare to face it? During the end of the Cretaceous period, around 70 million years ago, the Earth was living the final era of the dinosaurs. North America was dominated by Tyrannosaurus rex. Asia had its own king, Tarbosaurus. Groups of raptors spread across several continents, and over tens of millions of years, the carnivorous theropods became the most feared hunters the planet has ever seen. It was one of the most violent periods in the history of life. Giant predators appeared on almost every continent, each dominating its own territory. It seemed like a world tailor-made for hunters. And right in the middle of that age of predators, in a humid corner of Central Asia, arose the strangest of all these dinosaurs, Therizinosaurus, the scythe lizard. The first question is, how did an animal like this come to be? Therizinosaurus belonged to the same great branch of the most famous dinosaurs in history, the theropods, the same group as Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and today's birds. Almost all of its ancestors were built to hunt with sharp teeth and agile bodies. But at some point in that lineage of predators, one group did exactly the opposite of all the others. It stopped hunting. This group was named the Therizinosaurs, and Therizinosaurus was the last and largest of them all. It was the extreme endpoint of an evolutionary experiment, taking the body of a hunter and transforming it, little by little, into a giant herbivore. It traded serrated teeth for a beak. In place of a predator's bite, it gained small, leaf-shaped teeth and an enormous digestive system, able to ferment and process vegetation. It gained a long neck to reach the highest treetops, and a wide belly to digest all of it, exactly like the great modern herbivores do. In place of a hunter's lean body, something more like a giant ground sloth mounted on dinosaur legs emerged. And there's another detail that makes the image even more bizarre. It was probably covered in feathers. Close relatives of Therizinosaurus have been found with primitive feathers preserved in the rock. Since the climate of that region was colder and wetter than once thought, scientists believe a feathered body helped these giants keep warm. In other words, forget the image of a scaly-skinned reptile. Think of something closer to a giant, clumsy bird, with a long neck and huge belly.
It was, at the same time, one of the most terrifying and one of the most improbable animals ever to walk in the earth.
And how did an animal like this feed itself? The most likely picture is that of a tall, slow herbivore, moving slowly among the trees. Its long neck let it reach leaves almost no other animal could, and when a branch was too high, the claws came in. Those giant hooks pulled the branches down, bringing the leaves closer to the beak. It was more or less what a giant ground sloth would do millions of years later, only on the scale of
Dogs. It didn't need speed, it didn't need a powerful bite.
Its entire body was built for a single task, to eat as much vegetation as possible, with the least effort, without becoming anyone's meal in the process. But why would a herbivore need to get so big? Here's the important point. A herbivore doesn't need to chase anything. It doesn't spend energy hunting. It only needs two things: plenty of plant food nearby, and a way not to become food itself. And the bigger it gets, the fewer predators can threaten it.
The Mongolia of that time offered in abundance.
That was a land of wide rivers, channels winding across the landscape, flooded plains, and forests. A humid green world full of vegetation. The perfect environment for a giant plant eater to grow without limits, with leaves and shoots everywhere. And that's where Therizinosaurus stops being merely strange and becomes genuinely terrifying. To get a sense of the size of Therizinosaurus, it's worth comparing it with the most famous theropods that ever existed. It passed 33 feet in length and stood close to 16 feet tall with its head raised. In weight, it reached more than 5 tons. According to paleontologist Gregory Paul, it was the largest member of its group and one of the largest Maniraptorans that ever existed, the same great group that includes the raptors and the birds. Placed side by side with Tyrannosaurus rex, it's striking. It wasn't as heavy as T. rex, but it was on practically the same scale in length. When you realize that a herbivore reached the size of one of the greatest predators in history, Rex boasted teeth of about 8 inches. Therizinosaurus carried claws that, counting the keratin sheath, reached nearly 3 feet. They are the largest claws ever found on any land animal in history. No bear, no big cat, no other dinosaur comes close. And it wasn't just one. Each hand had 3 of these blades, with the largest on the first finger. Numbers can be hard to picture, so let's compare with everyday things. A samurai sword, a whole human arm, from shoulder to fingertips. A Therizinosaurus claw was that size, and it sat at the end of an arm more than 8 feet long. 6 of these blades, 3 on each side, always ready. Now imagine a herbivore the size of a bus, covered in feathers, walking slowly through the forest. And, hanging from its arms, 6 giant machetes dragging along the ground.
Size alone doesn't explain why no one hunted it.
Therizinosaurus was the combination of 3 things: the absurd reach of its arms, the size of its claws, and the weight behind each blow. Look at the claw length in this comparison. Therizinosaurus appears at the top, far above any predator alive today. The claws of a grizzly bear, a lion, an eagle, they all simply disappear next to it. A single swing of one of those arms could open a deep wound in almost any animal of its time. To put that weapon in perspective, picture a predator attacking. To kill Therizinosaurus, it would have to get close, and getting close meant entering the reach of 2 arms more than 8 feet long, ending in blades of nearly 3 feet. Before touching a single tooth to it, the attacker would already be inside the most dangerous zone possible. And there's a curious detail about these claws. For a long time, scientists argued about what they were actually for. They were narrow, straight, and flattened on the sides, very different from the curved claws of a predator built to tear flesh. The most widely accepted explanation is that they served mainly to pull branches and leaves toward the beak, like a giant hook. Some even suggested they were used to open termite mounds, but it would be impossible for an animal that size to sustain itself eating insects. But a tool made to bend trees also works very well as a weapon. What tears off a thick branch can also tear apart anything that gets too close. And here's a fact that puts it all in scale. If you compare the length of the claws with the body size of various animals, Therizinosaurus comes out on top in absolute numbers. No other land creature ever had claws so long. Some scientists have even nicknamed it the prehistoric version of Edward Scissorhands, precisely because of the image of those 6 giant hooks hanging from its arms. It's proof that, even without being a predator, it carried the most extreme weapons in the animal kingdom.
When a herbivore the size of Therizinosaurus stands up,
Opens its arms, and shows 6 blades, the predator's math changes completely. The risk of a serious injury becomes far too great to be worth any meal. But who exactly would have the courage to try? The great predator of that ecosystem was Tarbosaurus, an Asian cousin of Tyrannosaurus rex, 33 to 40 feet long, several tons, and a bite capable of crushing bone. Its teeth were thick, serrated, and built to withstand enormous loads, perfect for piercing and breaking. In almost any other setting, it would be the absolute master of the landscape.
and it probably was.
Tarbosaurus dominated that land, hunting the duck-billed hadrosaurs, the long-necked titanosaurs, and other herbivores. Almost everything in that world could become its prey. It was, without question, the king of that place. But there's a difference between being able to hunt and it being worth hunting. A hungry Tarbosaurus, looking at a hadrosaur, sees a relatively safe meal. Looking at an adult Therizinosaurus, it sees a tall, heavy target, armed with 6 blades and willing to use them. A single well-placed blow to the eyes or throat could end the hunt and perhaps the hunter itself. And predators, however powerful, can't afford to get hurt. A broken leg or a lost eye in the wild is a slow death sentence.
That's why most reconstructions of this ecosystem reach the same conclusion.
Predator and herbivore probably avoided each other. Tarbosaurus had easier prey, and Therizinosaurus didn't need to run. It just had to turn around and show its hands. That's what makes Therizinosaurus so fascinating. It didn't dominate that land by hunting, like Parasaurus or T-Rex. It dominated simply by being too dangerous to attack, a herbivore that made even the T-Rex of Asia think twice. But perhaps the most interesting question is, if you met a Therizinosaurus, what would your chances be? The good news here is that it wasn't a hunter. It wouldn't come after you. Unlike a Tarbosaurus, a Therizinosaurus didn't see a human as food. Left in peace, it would probably keep tearing off leaves, completely indifferent to your presence. The danger appeared if you startled it or got too close. A human runs between 6 and 9 miles per hour. Therizinosaurus was slow and clumsy in a straight line. In that respect, you'd have the advantage in a race. The problem is the reach. In a defensive swing of the arm, those claws would sweep across several feet in a single instant before you could even react.
In other words, if you keep your distance, you'd survive just fine.
If you made the mistake of entering the arm's reach of a cornered animal, a single defensive blow could be fatal. Unlike an encounter with a predator, here your survival didn't depend on strength or speed. It depended almost entirely on one thing: not bothering it. Around 70 million years ago, that ecosystem was completely different from the desert of today. It was a humid world cut by rivers and channels, full of forests and flooded plains, so rich that it supported several giants at the same time. At the base of that food chain were the plants, ferns, conifers, and the dense vegetation along the riverbanks. It was that plant abundance that turned the sun's energy into food and sustained all the great herbivores. Above them came the plant eaters, duck-billed hadrosaurs moving in herds, long-necked titanosaurs, some among the largest animals in the region, armored ankylosaurs like Tarchia, and the bizarre theropods that abandoned meat, Therizinosaurus with its claws, and Deinonychus, another strange giant with a beak like a duck's and enormous arms. There were also the faster, smaller hunters, the ostrich-mimic dinosaurs of the genus Gallimimus, fast and long-legged, small raptors like Atasaurus, and, hidden among the vegetation, crocodilians, turtles, primitive birds, and mammals the size of small rodents. And then we reached the top, above the herbivores, above the smaller hunters. Tarbosaurus, the supreme predator of that land, the Asian equivalent of Tyrannosaurus rex. It was among the prey and, at the same time, too dangerous to be treated as one.
Therizinosaurus survived for millions of years precisely because almost nothing was worth the risk of attacking it.
But not even the largest claws in history would help against what was coming. And to understand its end, we need to look far beyond that forest. While Therizinosaurus tore off leaves in peace, the whole world was moving toward the close of the age of dinosaurs. Around 66 million years ago, the end of the Cretaceous brought one of the greatest catastrophes in the history of life. An asteroid several miles across struck the Earth, in what is now Mexico. The impact released unimaginable energy, throwing dust, ash, and debris into the atmosphere. Sunlight was blocked, temperatures plummeted, and the planet plunged into a kind of global winter. Without enough light, photosynthesis practically stopped, and the plants began to die en masse. This is where the cruelest irony of Therizinosaurus' whole story appears.
Its claws were still the same, its size was still the same, its natural fortress was still intact.
It was the disappearance of the food itself. A giant herbivore depends on an enormous amount of vegetation every day. When the plants collapsed, the largest leaf eaters were exactly the first to feel it. The bigger the body, the more food it demands, and, in a world where food was disappearing, being giant stopped being an advantage and became a sentence. There was no claw big enough to tear leaves off trees that simply no longer existed. Many people imagine extinctions as battles, one monster defeating another in combat. But the story of Therizinosaurus ended in a very different way. It didn't end with a fight against Tarbosaurus. It didn't end with a predator finally overcoming its claws. Because, in the end, the best defended animal of its time didn't disappear because it met something stronger. It disappeared because the world that sustained it simply ceased to exist. And it wasn't just it. That same catastrophe wiped out the hadrosaurs, the titanosaurs, Tarbosaurus, and practically all the non-avian dinosaurs on the planet. Entire groups that took tens of millions of years to arise vanished in a geological blink of an eye. Therizinosaurus, the last and largest of the scythe lizards, was just one among countless giants the new world could no longer hold. And when the world changes like that, even the monster no predator dared to touch disappears along with it. But even after disappearing, Therizinosaurus wasn't completely erased from history. For tens of millions of years, its bones lay buried under the sediments of the ancient plains of Mongolia. The climate changed completely. The humid forest slowly became the Gobi Desert. Species arose and disappeared, and the remains of that giant stayed hidden under the sand, waiting. Until, in 1948, a joint Soviet-Mongolian expedition found something impossible to explain at the time. Giant claws, some nearly 3 feet long, next to very few bones. No one knew which animal they belonged to. The claws were so strange and so large that in 1954, the researcher Evgeny Maliev imagined they came from a kind of giant, unknown turtle that would use those blades to dig. That's why the species' scientific name to this day is Cheloniformis, a direct reference to turtles. It was only with new discoveries over the 1960s to the 1980s that scientists managed to put the pieces together. New arm and leg bones kept turning up, and little by little it became clear that those claws weren't from any turtle. They were from a theropod, a direct relative of the greatest hunters in history that, against all expectation, had turned into a herbivore. To this day, Therizinosaurus is known from very few bones. Much of everything we know comes precisely from those claws, the same ones that confused the first scientists and that gave the animal its name, the scythe lizard. Each new analysis helps fill in a little more of this improbable story. And perhaps this is the most impressive part of the whole story.
No human ever saw a living Therizinosaurus. No civilization recorded its existence.
Remained of it were a few claws buried in the desert sand. And even so, from those few fragments, we managed to reconstruct one of the most bizarre and best-armed animals ever to walk the earth. A monster covered in feathers, with the largest claws in history, a relative of the most feared predators on the planet, and which, even so, never had to hunt anything to become practically untouchable. The safest animal of all is precisely the one no one had the courage to face. For millions of years, it walked through the forest as living proof of that, powerful not for killing, but for being impossible to kill without paying too high a price.